Everything you wanted to know about leaky gut in 10 minutes or less. Okay, class, pay attention. First of all, leaky gut is the colloquialism for intestinal permeability. Leaky gut is not pseudoscience. It has been well documented, well proven, beginning with Professor Alessio Fasano, who's now professor of pediatric gastroenterology at Harvard. And he sought to figure out why gluten, which is a lectin, caused the extreme form of gluten intolerance called celiac disease. Quickly, the lining of your gut is only 1 cell thick. And the lining of your gut is the same surface area as 1 or 2 tennis courts in you. That sounds like a design flaw, and it is, because everything that you swallow is up here, and everything that stands between you and everything you swallow and 100 trillion bacteria is 1 cell thick. Now, I grew up playing a game called Red Rover, where there were 2 lines of kids and we were all crossed arms. For those of you who are very young, it's now illegal in school, so you can't play it anymore. But each of these cells is held together, crossed-armed, with what's called a tight junction. And it's literally holding these cells together. Because quite frankly, you really wouldn't want 100 trillion bacteria getting past this single cell lining. On the other side of the wall of your gut, 80% of all your white blood cells, your immune cells, line the gut. Those are those little blue guys. Why are 80% of all your white blood cells there? Because quite frankly, they're waiting to get attacked by 100 trillion bacteria. Not to mention worms, parasites, and viruses. No wonder the army is stationed right next to mischief. Okay, so normally, these guys ought to stay over there. But what was discovered was the gluten molecule, a lectin, by the way, wants to get its way to attach to a sugar molecule on the lining of the gut. And when it does, it produces a compound that is now known as zonulin. Zonulin then hits a receptor and breaks the tight junction. In other words, the guy ran through the 2 girls screaming. We now have a gap. And through that gap, unfortunately, 3 possible things can happen. Number 1, lectins, those are these little guys, which are foreign proteins, can get through the wall of the gut. And your white blood cells go, oh my gosh, we've been invaded. These are foreign, and we should not only attack them, try to eat them and kill them, but we should send out signals. We should go to threat level 5 and let everybody in the body, all the rest of the white blood cells in the body, to be on the lookout for these guys, because clearly they might get past us, and we should let everybody know they're coming. That, believe it or not, is the cause of inflammation. Now, long ago, this inflammation was localized. A gap would occur, white cells would grab these guys, the gap would seal up, no problem. Now, however, we have kind of 24 hours a day, 365 days a year of these tight junctions being broken. Now, we can measure how much they're broken with blood tests, sophisticated blood tests. So there's no pseudoscience involved. We can detect the degree of leaky gut. And what happens is now, instead of just a localized little war that snuffed out instantaneously, we now literally have a forest fire of inflammation in our body. So people talk about, well, I need to eat anti-inflammatory foods. Eating anti-inflammatory foods is like here in Southern California, fighting the current fire with a garden hose, and it will not work. So we've gone from kind of localized inflammation to now chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is why Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, said all disease begins in the gut. Now, maybe he should have rephrased that all disease begins in a leaky gut, but he was the first to talk about that. Now, second, those bacteria, they're not just laying around. They have little cell walls. They're dying all the time. And some of those cell walls are called lipopolysaccharides. I don't swear, but in my books I call them little pieces of, yes, because that's literally what they are. Now, those guys, not only lectins, but LPSs can now leak through the wall of the gut. And your white blood cells cannot tell the difference between a living bacteria and a dead bacteria because they're actually reading the barcode on the wall of this dead bacteria and assume that they're living. How bad are these guys? Well, if you've watched my podcast with Wim Hof, the Iceman, you know that we could take healthy volunteers and inject LPSs into their bloodstream. Now remember, these are not living bacteria. They're dead. They're sterile. And those healthy volunteers will go into septic shock. Their blood pressure will plummet. They'll nearly die because their white blood cells assumed that living bacteria had taken over their body. Now, the reason we had Wim Hof is he's learned through breath techniques to be completely immune from that effect. And he's trained volunteers using his techniques to not have that effect. But you and I, these guys activate our white blood cells. Our blood cells say, oh my gosh, we're now being invaded by not only lectins, but LPSs, mobilize the troops around the body. And if you see these guys anywhere else, attack. Third problem. Now, normally, all the food you eat is broken down by our digestive system and our microbiome into individual sugar molecules, individual amino acids from proteins, and individual fatty acids that would be absorbed and enter our bloodstream. But if you have gaps in the wall of your gut, undigested food particles can leak through the wall of the gut as well. And here's the bad news. Broccoli. Let's suppose you eat a lot of broccoli and you have leaky gut. And then all of a sudden, a piece of broccoli ends up on the other side of the wall of the gut. And your immune cells say, what the heck? I have never seen a piece of broccoli in my life. That is foreign. And the next time I see it, I will try to kill it. I'll remember what it looks like. So these are called food sensitivities. They're totally different than food allergies. Back in the old days when I started with this, we would do food allergy testing where we'd put 100 pinpricks on your back and see what turned red, and I was never impressed that it helped me very much. But when we started doing food sensitivities in my patients with leaky gut, all of a sudden it became very clear. I even have patients who are sensitive to romaine lettuce. Guess why? Because they eat a lot of romaine lettuce. So we now have 3 simultaneous things activating our immune system. We have lectins, which are foreign proteins like gluten. And if you've read Gut Check, you know 100% of my patients with leaky gut have antibodies to gluten and the other forms of wheat. 100%, not one doesn't. Number 2, we now have pieces of bacteria or even living bacteria getting through the wall of the gut activating our immune system. And number 3, we have undigested food particles that now can appear. So we've got 3 problems, and our immune system is at threat level 5, and they're constantly sending out information through what are called inflammatory cytokines to alert every other white blood cell in our body that trouble is on the way, and arm yourself. So all of our white blood cells are now wearing a Kevlar vest, carrying 2 AK-47s, and their fingers are on the trigger. That's where inflammation is killing us. And it's all from leaky gut. More amazing episodes just like this one. Watch now. What modern diets are often missing is a special kind of fiber known as prebiotic fiber. Dietary sources of prebiotic fiber include Jerusalem artichokes, tiger nuts, Belgian endive, chicory, parsnips, and a lot of others.